These are days and nights of red and blood. Heroes will rise as the anchors fall.
Hey, what's up guys, it's Cypher and welcome to my Stamina Nightblade PvP build video. In this video I'm going to be going over the Stamina Nightblade build I've been playing for the past 5 or 6 days. Even though it's been such a short period of time, I feel extremely comfortable with the setup I have going. So I'm just going to share this with you guys and let you guys carry on the build, make your own adjustments that you feel necessary. And if I make any adjustments to the build in the next coming weeks, I'll make sure I keep you guys updated. I like to make these build videos short and to the point, so let's just get started. Our first bar is going to be our 2H bar. We are using Executioner as our execute, and the reason we're using Executioner over Killer's Blade is Killer's Blade only starts scaling when your opponent is 25% or lower health, while Executioner starts scaling up to 300% from 50% down to 0. The major difference is in the 1.6 or 2.0 plus meta, a lot of people have a lot lower health. So when someone is within execute range of Killer Blade, most of the time you can kill them with even a surprise attack or any of your other single target abilities. We'll be able to kill a target that has 24% or less health. And Executioner starts scaling at 50%, so you have a much larger execute range. And at the same time, Executioner gives you 18% additional damage to targets that have low health. This applies to Executioner. This applies to your crit charge. This also applies to your light and heavy attacks with 2H. So it gives you a lot more damage and also has a bigger execute range. That's why I like to use Executioner over Killer's Blade, but that doesn't mean you can't use Killer's Blade and be successful. Surprise Attack is our single target ability, single target DPS, and most of my builds do have single target DPS involved in them, so that's why we have Surprise Attack here. It's really quick. You get into your opponent's face, you do some animation canceling with light and Surprise Attack, you put out a lot of damage, you go in for the execute. Critical Rush. And the reason I'm using Critical Rush over Ambush, I have to make this clear. Ambush is a really good ability, and you could put Ambush here instead of Critical Rush. But I believe personally that Critical Rush does more upfront damage compared to Ambush, and in the long run you have more potential burst damage with Critical Rush, especially since it scales based off of distance. This build has extremely fast mobility, and you can control the distance between you and your opponent extremely easily. So it synergizes well with Critical Rush. Magnum Shot on our bow bar also synergizes well with Critical Rush. So in my opinion, you could go with Ambush, but I personally feel a lot more comfortable playing with Critical Rush, and I've performed a lot better with Critical Rush using this build. Mass Hysteria is going to be your main CC. This is going to drop your opponent's block so that you can quickly burst them down while they're feared before they CC break, or if they're out of stamina and you fear them, that's pretty much going to be a guaranteed kill given the amount of burst this build has. It's just a really good ability, and even though this is a stamina build, you do have enough magicka regen and enough magicka to be casting Mass Hysteria almost every 6 seconds. So use this build. You can use this ability offensively and defensively. It's just really good, and you'll see in the videos how I use this build to my advantage. Rally is going to be your main heal. Now, I do not have Vigor. I'm going to tell you where you can put Vigor if you have it, but I decided, because I don't have Vigor, I really do want to make a successful stam build that doesn't rely on Vigor. And I think this build does that. Even though Vigor will improve this build can be competitive without it. Rally heals you over time. It also gives you Major Brutality, which increases your weapon damage by 20%. And then you can reactivate Rally. Depending on how long it's been active, it'll give you a burst heal. So the longer you wait, the more burst you have. It's really important that you keep Rally up the majority of the time. And a lot of the times when I do get low and I really need a heal, I'll hit Rally a few times. And given the crit chance I have with this build, gets up to 50% crit. So you will get some decent heal if you can, break off from your enemy, go in a cloak, and then hit Rally a few times just to get your health back up to full. Really useful heal, and also gives you extra weapon damage, so it's a must for all 2H users. Incapacitating Strike is our first ultimate. You could put Dawnbreaker here for an extra 8% boost to your weapon damage, but I personally like Incapacitating Strike because it allows me to get kills a lot easier. It gets you, first of all, it's really cheap. It only costs 48 ultimate, and it gives you a huge burst. You get 20% extra damage for 6 seconds after you activate it. You also reduce the target's healing by 30%, and it just does a lot of damage for a really cheap ultimate. What I like to do is I like to get in people's face, fear them, and immediately go for the Incapacitating Strike just so I can guarantee that they won't block it, and then go in for my burst. The reason I'm not using Soul Harvest is because this this build does not rely on ultimate. So the 4.5 second stun that you could proc if you have lower health than your opponent is extremely long, and it also could help you get the kill if you do knock them down and they don't have time to CC break, or they add a stamina and they can't CC break. Our second bar is going to be our bow bar. We are using Magnum Shot. Like I said, this is to create distance between you and your opponent so that you can critical rush them from longer distance and put out more damage. This is also useful to push opponents off ledges and cliffs. I know fall damage has been removed from a majority of the knockdown effects in Cyrodiil, and this was due to a bug, but it's going to be coming back soon enough. So you can use Magnum Shot to push people off ledges. You can also use it to control your opponent's movement, and also use it to increase distance between you and your opponent so that your crit charge does a lot of damage. Poison Injection. A lot of people use the other morph that interrupts casting targets, and there's nothing wrong with that morph, but I personally really enjoyed having the extra damage to low health targets. Poison Injection has helped me kill people from long range, because if they do get low health, it starts scaling just like the 2H, and I've had this crit for over 8k, the dot tick crit for over 8k before against low health targets, and it just really helps apply a lot of pressure onto your opponents. This build revolves around killing your opponents as fast as you can, because even though you do have a lot of sustain, you don't have a lot of healing, and a big part of your healing comes from killing people, and a big part of your sustain also comes from killing people. I'll go into detail on the passives and stuff like that that affect actually killing people to sustain yourself and also get a heal. Double Take is going to be our dodge chance. It's also going to be our major expedition, giving us movement speed for 40%. People might be wondering why I'm not using the medium armor skill, the dodge chance from the medium armor skill, and it's because, first of all, it's always nice to have mana sync like Double Take, and it's also extremely useful to have the 40% movement speed, and I'll explain to you why that movement speed is really, really good, because it stacks with a few other movement speeds that we have, allowing you to move extremely fast, and this build does revolve around mobility for survivability, so I'll show you guys that before this video ends. Piercing Mark. The reason, by the way, this is the ability you can replace with Vigor. If you have Vigor, I'd put Vigor here. The main reason we're using Piercing Mark is because of the 41% of your max health is returned to you if you kill someone who's marked. The reason we don't really need it for the major fracture, which reduces your opponent's armor, we don't really care about the spell resist because none of our abilities go based off spell resist, but major fracture can be applied through surprise attack. If you go into cloak and hit someone with surprise attack, you will give them major fracture for 17.3 seconds. So you already have that built in, but the main reason we're using this is for the extra heal that you get for killing someone. And if you have Vigor, you can just put Vigor here, and you don't really need Piercing Mark, to be honest with you. Cloak, this is going to remove dots off you, especially since you don't have a heal. It's extremely useful. Allows you to create a distance between you and your opponent if you feel pressured. There's a lot of uses for Cloak, and this build actually, because of the dodge roll mechanic, you can dodge roll a lot with this build. You can have a lot of successful cloaks, because what you want to do to have a successful cloak is you want to break distance between you and your opponent before you cloak. Because a lot of times if you're really close, a lot of single target abilities will pull you out of cloak. A lot of AoEs will pull you out of cloak. Detect potions, Mage's Light. So you want to break distance and then cloak, and you have a lot of ways to break distance with this build. So even though cloak does cost a lot, and this is a stand build, I tend to have a lot of really successful cloaks compared to my Magicka build. On my Magicka build, I pretty much have to spam cloak to get a successful cloak off. But with this one, the movement and the mobility that I get with this build allows me to cloak a lot more easier. Soul Tether is going to be your ultimate. You could also put Meteor if you just want to have some fun with it, but I really like Soul Tether because of the fact that it heals you depending on how many targets you hit. You can get a decent heal out of it if you feel like you're about to run out of health and you just Soul Tether your opponents. It buys you time. It's an AoE stun. It also heals you. It does decent damage. So it's always nice to have extra heal options, especially with a build that doesn't have a lot of healing. Now let's go into our passives. Some passives that I want to highlight. Like I said, there are a few passives that are really important. The reason we don't have immovable is because the Nightblade passive Shadow Barrier already gives you armor, and you get your resistance and stuff from Nightblade ability and passives. But here is where we get most of our movement speed. After doing a dodge roll, your movement speed is increased by 30% for 2 seconds. That's if you dodge roll with your bow ability on. This stacks with Double Take. And then I'll go into we also mix that in with sprinting, and I'll go into why sprinting is really cheap on this build compared to other builds, but that will be covered as soon as we get into the armor choices. That's mainly the two passes that I want to highlight. I just want to highlight the Hasty Retreat. and then also the Shadow Barrier. That's the two main passives that I want to cover. So let's just get straight into the character sheet. We are using regeneration potions. We're not using the tri-stat. With the stand build, you do have to have high regen. We're using V10 purple regen potions. It's going to give us decent magic recovery, health recovery, and stamina recovery. While our stamina recovery is buffed, I'll show you how it looks like when it's buffed, and I'll show you our weapon damage when it's buffed. Weapon damage on a 2H is 2k flat, and when you buff it all the way, it goes up to 2.886. Our crit is 37%, but when you buff it, it goes up to like 45%. There's a few things that affect this, and I'll show you guys right now once I get into the armor sheet. We're using the Warrior Mundus Stone. We're also Werewolf for the extra 50% stamina regen that you get from Werewolf. And we're also using the Warrior for extra weapon damage. So let's go into our armor sets. I'm going to just refresh the potion so I can show you guys the regen stats once I'm done covering this. We're using 5 pieces of the Skirmisher. Now, I used to use Wave the Air, but a good friend of mine named Jago pointed out that Skirmisher is probably a little bit more offensive, and you don't lose out on any of the bonuses from Skirmisher compared to Wave the Air. Let's compare the two. 5 pieces of Skirmisher on the body. This one gives me stamina recovery, weapon critical, max stamina, and when I roll dodge, I get 400 weapon damage and 10% weapon critical for 5 seconds. Wave the Air gives you 2 stamina recoveries instead of a stamina recovery and a crit. And then the 4-piece gives you stealth detection, which is not extremely useful, to be honest with you. I'd rather have the extra stamina and stealth detection. The 5-piece gives you only 308 weapon damage compared to 400, and it gives you spell damage, which is useless, but the skirmisher set gives us 10% weapon critical, which is more useful for our build. The other sets we're using is 3 pieces of Ashen Grip. We're using two armor pieces, the shoulder piece and the belt piece. And then both our weapons are Ashen Grip so that we can get the 3-piece weapon damage bonus from this. It also gives us a 2-piece health bonus. Both the weapons have sharpen traits on them. On the sword, we're using Crushing Enchant to reduce our target's armor. On the bow, we're using the Disease Enchant for that chance to proc a heal debuff. And for our jewelry, we're running 3 pieces of the Shadow Walker. Now, I know these are really expensive. The pendant goes for around 40k, and the bands go for about 100k or even more. So if you don't have these jewelry pieces, there's not a lot of options because of the fact that stamina jewelry is really expensive because it's in high demand. But I would just put together any jewelry sets that you do have access to, and just put reduction cost for stamina abilities on all 3 jewelry pieces, and you should be set to run this build. Even though it's not going to be the most efficient way to run it, you should still be able to perform well with this build, given the burst that you have. Now, that's basically it for the build. Let me go into the champion points really quickly. I like to make this part quick because it's always going to be changing. We have 10 points for reduction cost into stamina abilities and into magic abilities because we do use both. We have 8 points into magic recovery, 8 points into stamina recovery, 9 points into tumbling, which reduces the cost of dodge rolling and break free. 2 points into Blade Expert. I'm going to start putting more points into here. This is going to increase your light and heavy attacks with your 2H, and this does make a big difference because your 2H does hit really hard. 34 points into increasing my physical damage, 9 points into increasing my physical penetration. 12 points into spell resistance, 5 points into the medium armor focus, which gives us more armor based because of the fact that we're wearing 5 pieces of medium armor. 17 points into hardy, which reduces magic damage, poison, and disease damage. 11 points into elemental defender, which reduces elemental damage. That's basically it for the champion points. Of course, yours might look different. You should customize it based off of your weaknesses and support your weaknesses through the champion tree. If you have a hard time with managing your stamina, put more points into stamina regen. If you have a hard time managing your magicka, put more points into magicka regen. If you feel like you're not doing enough damage, put more points into penetration and increasing your physical damage. It really just depends on your playstyle, to be honest with you. So let me just cover over like really quickly how to get your buffs and stuff like that. This build has 2k weapon damage with the 2H out, and when we apply the 2H rally buff, it goes up to 2.3k. And when we apply the skirmisher set, it goes up to 2.81 for 5 seconds. But you're constantly going to be dodge rolling with this build, and dodge roll is pretty inexpensive considering our regen and reduced cost. So you're constantly going to be dodge rolling, so you should have your weapon damage around 2.881 for majority of the fight. I know some people are able to push their weapon damage over 4,000 given certain sets and ability setups, but to be honest with you, I've been extremely successful with just 2.8k weapon damage, and I've been able to take down opponents relatively quickly while maintaining decent, regen. Our regen, while it's unbuffed, it's at 1.8k. While it's buffed from the potion passive, which you should have if you're using potions for a majority of the fight, it's going to be 2k. And then the 2H passive Battle Rush gives you 30% additional stamina regeneration for 10 seconds after killing a target. So you can get your stamina regen up to maybe 2.5k. Like, I know people can get it up to 3k, but to be honest with you, the setup I'm using right now, I've been really successful with. If you have other setups, if you want to push more weapon damage or more stamina regen, you can go ahead and do that. But so far I've been experimenting with this and it's been going pretty well. Let me showcase you just the movement speed that we get. So the reason our speed is really fast is because we can sprint at a reduced cost. 5 pieces of skirmisher, every single piece has well fitted on it, which reduces the cost of sprinting by 9%. At first, I did not really like this trait because Way of the Air gave me infuse and divines and stuff like that. But well fitted, I didn't really see myself using sprint a lot. But with this build, the speed buffs that you get mixed with sprint is extremely useful. So the first buff we have is after dodge rolling, we get 2 seconds of 30% extra movement speed from the bow passive. We also have double take, which gives us 40% movement speed for 4 seconds. So this is what it looks like when you mix the 2% and the 4 seconds. Pretty quick. But when you mix it with sprinting as well, this is how it looked like. So extremely fast movement speed that you can apply to yourself to get out of sticky situations, and extremely useful on the battlefield when you need to either chase down an opponent or run away from an opponent, or just reposition yourself. So this is the build that I have for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll make sure to reply to them. The race is Imperial. The most preferred race, in my opinion, would be Redguard or Bosmer, but Imperial is also really good. The reason I'm an Imperial is because I like to do Magicka builds as well, and Imperial allows me to go Magicka or Stamina and still feel really comfortable with the passives that I have. So I have all my attribute points into Stamina. If you guys have any questions, please leave them below, and I'll make sure I get to you. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys on my live stream. As soon as this video goes up, I will be live streaming on Twitch, twitch.tv/cypherpk. I'll see you guys soon.